YouTube, it's Tone back with another one for you. So this one is what do we got? The Foreclosure Defense Handbook. So this is the second video here for this, and you guys are gonna like this one. So check this out. You know, we went over who has the right to foreclose on a mortgage, right? And so we went over the fact that when the promissory note is converted into a security, it's no longer able to be foreclosed on any one particular person because a lot of different people own that. So nobody has the right to foreclose, especially the fucking banks who are not even a real party of interest and not even a real person, right? Because they can't stand and state for the record their name and their standing in any given situation. Okay, so right here, so let's go. If the thousands of shareholders each hold a tiny part of your promissory note, can any one of them foreclose on your house? The answer is no. A promissory note is only enforceable in its whole entirety. All right, so that is the nature of the fraud being perpetrated before the American public and worldwide. And this is happening all over the world. It's not just in America. You know what I mean? So the REMIC, investors and shareholders explained. So there is a lot of confusion around the concept of securities conversion, specifically around the various parties involved, such as the investor and the shareholder. This chapter explains in great detail how each of the entities tie in together. And so here you see a little pie chart of how it all works here. To illustrate the point, let's use another analogy. Let's say that I am Steve Jobs in the 1970s. I come to you asking for $1,000 to invest in my little company called Apple. Part of Apple's assets is the intellectual property and the design of Apple computer. Okay. So 10 years later, we go public because you were my initial investor. Your initial shares are now worth a lot of money when they convert your percentage of the ownership as an investor into the publicly traded stock. Imagine, however, if immediately after I go public, I create another company and assign the intellectual property and design of the Apple computer to this new company. Is that legal? The answer is no. That's commonly known as bait and switch. You cannot register one thing with the SEC and market the stock, and then after the money is transferred, switch out the asset. How this relates to a REMIC is this. There are two pseudo-government entities called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And these motherfuckers are ridiculous. Wait till we get into this. Alright, it's crazy. So there are two pseudo-government entities called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These are actually privately owned companies, which all of these government agencies are all privately owned companies. Alright, they're all privately owned for-profit companies. That's all that they are. So these two giants fund or invest in most of the REMICs created for the purpose of securitization. They are the investors. Once the REMIC gets converted into stock, Freddie and Fannie get very rich because they are the majority shareholders of these publicly traded stocks. When a REMIC is formed, its assets, your loan, plus thousands of other people's loans, are declared a permanent fixture to the REMIC. This is like the intellectual property of the Apple computer. This is registered with the SEC. It is public information. In other words, once an asset is registered and traded as part of the security, you cannot switch it out because it has become a permanent fixture of the traded asset. The conclusion I want you to take away here is that an asset declared in SEC filing is permanently attached. This is a permanent conversion. This means there is no doubt that your loan or promissory note is no more. Alright, so I mean, you see what it is, okay? So let's take a case of double existence to illustrate the point. Let's say we have the stock traded on Wall Street that supposedly contained the note. Next, we take the promissory note and we assign it to another bank, who takes it and securitizes it again. If this situation were to happen, the same loan would be traded twice on Wall Street. In other words, the second set of investors get duped. They bought a lemon. They basically bought a forgery. This is securities fraud and it cannot happen. Now keep in mind, this is what a lot of these people do too when they show up with a copy of your promissory note and they can never produce the original one. That shit is all fraud because they already transferred it from a promissory note into a security and they're still trying to collect on that. Not to mention the fact that after you go into default, insurance pays for it and then they go and write the whole fucking thing off and get the credits from the IRS and then turn around and try to charge you the full fucking amount for the house that they just discharged, okay? This is what the fuck they're doing. Conclusion. So let's summarize our points. Since over 85% of the loans have been securitized. All right. So let's get into this. So we know that the banks are not the real parties of interest in any foreclosure transactions. Neither are the investors of the REMIC. No one can foreclose. When a loan goes into default, it gets written off by the REMIC. That's what I just told you. And once an asset is written off, it gets the tax credits from the IRS. This means that it is settled. The note is gone. Alright? So these people are double dipping on you. They're writing it off. They're getting the full credits from the IRS, meaning that they're getting an offset from taxes that they would have had to pay on their fucking profits. So instead of having to pay the taxes, they go ahead and use your fucking debt to offset their books. Okay? So now that debt is clear, that shit is zeroed out. Why the fuck would they send you a bill again? You know what I'm saying? Come on. The only way a bank can foreclose on you is if they buy it back from the open market as an unsecured debt, just like a debt collector would. Remember, the debt has been written off, tax credits have been given to the shareholders and the REMIC, it is no more. So essentially, these banks are picking up the promissory note not for pennies on the dollar, and through deceit, they try to reattach the converted loan to the deed trust mortgage. Then they take these documents and represent them to the world as if they are real parties of interest. They bring these documents into court, deceiving the court and their own counsel, who for the most part are ignorant of this scheme. And that's the thing too. So you always have to bring your proof when you go into court, because if you walk in there and you're just saying this because you know it, even though it's true, it doesn't matter. All these people are fucking 100% brainwashed and they're gonna look at you like you're a fucking psychopath, when in all reality they're the fucking ignorant morons. So always gotta go in there and bring your proof, okay? So, and this is how the banks steal your house and the house for millions of families around the country. This means if you are facing a foreclosure, you need to learn the truth about your loan and learn how to fight for your rights. This means that if you have lost your home due to a foreclosure, you might be a victim of fraud and entitled to punitive damages up to 3 times the value of your loan. All right, and that's what I tell all of my clients too, is that you know, as soon as you go into the litigation with all these parties, what you want to do is open up a counterclaim, and that's going to be for 3 times the value of whatever your loan was worth. So if you owed $500,000 on your house, then you're going to go ahead and put in a counterclaim for $1.5 million. Okay, so that's how that's going to work. And you don't have to go file it and open up your own case because you'll already have it open because they went ahead and started the lawsuit. Okay, so this is why I want to share the document with you, so you know that you've been conned and you have a right to be angry, because you should be. So hang on, let me write this down. So the bubble burst of 2008 to 2009, and no one was complaining when things were going strong, and everyone was happy when everyone had a home. The housing prices were going to double in digits until the house of cards came tumbling down. So no one can pin it to a specific date, but sometimes in 2008 things started going downhill. The bubble had gotten to a point where more of the homeowners were realizing that they could no longer afford their multi-million-dollar artificially inflated homes on a minimum wage income. More and more homes were beginning to go into default. As more and more loans went into default, this affected the value of the mortgage-backed securities. You see, the shareholders of the investors and these stocks made 3 fatal assumptions about what they bought. Number 1, they assumed that the bank did the right thing in their underwriting process, and they didn't. Number 2, they assumed that once a loan was in their portfolio went into default, they were able to foreclose to cover their losses. They were wrong. Number 3, they assumed that this ride would never end, and it did. So once Wall Street investors realized they could not cover their losses by foreclosing on the underlying assets, they became very upset, and rightly so. They started suing the banks to stop buying the homes and these toxic assets. And that's the funny part too, because when you read your the information related to the property that you bought, you know, there's a clause in there too for whoever's gonna buy the promissory note, and they do let them know that you do have the right to rescind and jump right out of the contract if at any point you want to. All right, because in all reality, it's a fucking investment contract. It's not anything more or less. So investors stopped buying the mortgage-backed securities soon. The money pool dried up. Soon, no one could get loans, not even those with 800 plus FICO scores. The house market started to plummet. So the $3 trillion bail. Yo, and this is the one thing that I want to make clear for everybody. If the government uses your tax dollars to bail out a bank, meaning that the bank is fucking under, and they go and cover all of their debts for $3 trillion, and they use your fucking tax money, why would you pay them a mortgage still when you already paid for them to go back into business? You covered all their debts already. Your shit is paid. And a lot of people got their houses discharged because of what I just told you. All right. So as more investors sued these banks, things got ugly. This is the day of reckoning for our banker friends. It is time to pay the piper. The bankers got scared. All their greedy scams had finally caught up with them. So they got together and bribed Congress to bail them out, threatening that if Congress didn't, we would have a financial Armageddon. The fall of Wall Street. Everybody's retirement funds would immediately be wiped out. Put simply, they were too big to fail. Donald Trump said it best. When I borrowed $100,000 and I defaulted, it was my problem. When I borrowed $100 million and I defaulted, it became their problem. Faced with a no-win situation, Congress quickly signed the TARP, Troubled Over Asset Relief Program. So that's the acronym for TARP. Bailout, which authorized the Federal Reserve to give over $900 billion to the banks in the first round. We now know that the Federal Reserve has since given over $3.5 trillion to the bank with very few strings attached. Now let's be very clear. The banks were given free money from the taxpayers to pretty much do what they see fit. They could give bonuses to top executives, go to the Bahamas for a retreat, they could buy jets, buy up smaller banks, invest in gold, whatever they wanted to do with no strings attached. And they did all this shit with your fucking tax money, alright? So as housing prices kept dropping, many low income homeowners, as well as the real investors, got caught up. No one expected the bubble to happen. Everyone thought this ride would never end. The low income homeowners and investors alike would buy any property at almost any price, knowing that they could sell their property in a few months later for more than what they bought the property for in the hot market. Now homeowners and investors find themselves with properties that are worth significantly less than what they owed. Worse, many homeowners and investors went into the game with negative cash flow business plans. Their expected exit strategy was through price appreciation and the appreciating market. And so that's the thing. I mean, you never know what's going to happen with the markets, and that's a lie because you actually do. It goes up and down just like an algorithm. If you ever looked at charts of it, then you would see that. So when the capital markets dry up, no one could get loans. Since housing prices are dependent on people's ability to secure loans, when people could no longer get loans, no one could afford to buy the houses. Thus, we find ourselves in a housing crisis today. The markets that experience the highest growth, specifically California, Nevada, Florida, and Arizona, are also the ones with the highest foreclosure problems. Currently, millions of families are faced with an unrealistic burden for mortgage payments well beyond their income ratio. Added to this, millions of families are out of work due to the contraction in the economy as the market is correcting itself into a true equilibrium. As more and more families are finding themselves in financial trouble, the rate of real bank defaults is much bigger than what the banking industry would like us to believe. Many people are months, if not years, behind on their payments, but the banks are not ready to foreclose or declare these loans delinquent. So what they're saying here is that there's a lot of fucking people who owe a lot of money. And I even know people too that haven't paid their mortgage in 6 months and they haven't got a foreclosure letter or fucking anything. I mean, these people are swamped with them, but if they really put the true numbers out there, this shit would be crazy. So as more and more loans go into default, more and more homeowners are fighting back. More people are learning about the loan fraud securitization. But until now, few people could fully comprehend the mechanics of how the fraud was being perpetrated. This is the reason why this book is being given to you and why people are passing this book to everyone they know. I am exposing the fraud for the first time in simple English so people can understand. And that's the thing too. I mean, this book puts shit pretty damn simply, to the point where I don't even really have to break shit down further. But I will though, if I feel like I have to. But this shit is pretty much in plain English, and anything that I see that looks complicated, I'll go ahead and break it down. But for the most part, self-explanatory bullshit. All right. So the bank fraud exposed. So now that we've explained the securitization process, you are probably more informed about this problem than most judges and attorneys. And that's what I was just telling you. A lot of these people don't even know. And if they do know, they're going to pretend not to know, because if they say they fucking knew, that means that they knowingly committed fucking fraud. Okay? So of course they're going to pretend to fucking know nothing. You know what I mean? So that's the word I'm looking for. Plausible deniability. That's all that they have. Okay? So tell your friends about it. Talk to your neighbors about it. Write to your congressperson. Next time you are at a social gathering, bring this up. This is the only way to wake up America. And this is what I do, bro. That's why I got the channel up, and I'm even surprised the channel's even still fucking going, to be honest with you. So I saw the bullshit and I started a channel. So let's summarize in case you missed it. When a loan has been securitized, it gets converted from a debt into a stock. The real and beneficial parties of interest are the individual shareholders holding a fraction of a note. Therefore, no one person may foreclose on the property. But wait a minute. If this is the case, why are there so many houses being foreclosed on every day? Even today, despite the robo-signer scandals. Robo-signer scandals, what the shit that he's talking about with that is when everybody got their mortgages discharged because they did a robo-signer, made basically rubber stamping everybody's fucking mortgages, and nobody signed them, right? So the problem goes way deeper than the robo-signers. Not only are loan assignments not properly assigned and recorded, they do not even have the right to do so. Remember FAS 140? Once an asset has been sold, you forever lose control of that asset. If it is sold to the REMIC, how can the bank, who is no longer the real party of interest, foreclose? And that's the thing. Like I said, when they sell the promissory note off, the fucking mortgage is discharged. And when they sell the promissory note off, they forfeit their position as holder in due course. They're no longer entitled to payment, okay? So they get away with it every single day because they rely on our collective ignorance. They rely on your ignorance, the judge's ignorance, and the attorney's ignorance, the foreclosure and the mortgage industry personnel's ignorance. It's time to wake everyone up. So you guys see what it is. So give me a free iPod. Let's talk about the difference between an investor, a shareholder, and a real party of interest. When your loan is underwritten, the bank needs investors to initially provide the money to fund the transaction. Oftentimes, this is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but they put up the initial cash so the REMIC can buy these loans. This security is then traded on Wall Street. In other words, when the REMIC gets converted into a stock, the investors make money because they got in on the ground floor investment. Buy low, sell high. In many cases, they became the majority shareholders of these REMIC trusts. Sounds like a fucking conflict of interest to me, to be honest with you. You know what I mean? So let's talk about the rights of a shareholder by using Apple stocks as an example. Let's say you own 1,000 Apple shares, and Apple advertises that they historically pay about $1,000 per month on dividends. Let's say after a couple of months, Apple had a bad quarter and stops paying you your $1,000, and the next month it doesn't get better. They now owe you $2,000. Does this even give you the does this then give you the right to go into the Apple store and pick up a new Mac laptop? The answer is you'll likely get arrested for theft. This is the same thing with the shareholders of the REMIC. A shareholder of an asset cannot just go to the store and pick up goods as recompensation. This means the individual shareholders cannot dip in and touch the loan or the assets. Besides, they own the carriages. Remember, this means they own a little bit of thousands. All right, a little bit of thousands of loans. So basically, let's get into the next page. So right here. So let's look at the cast and the crew of the heist. So we have the following characters: the lender, investor, shareholders, REMIC, the trustee of the REMIC, and the servicer. The original lender cannot foreclose. As I discussed earlier in the FAS 140, the original lender sold the REMIC and forever lost their rights enforce the note. The investor and shareholder cannot foreclose. As I illustrated with the Apple and iPod example, while the investor and shareholders as a whole are the real parties of interest individually, they cannot just come and foreclose because they only own a tiny portion of the loan. The REMIC and trustee. Remember, the REMIC holds all the loans together in a pool and servicing agreement. However, because they chose to avoid the IRS tax rules, IRC 860, for double taxing, they pass it on to the real party of interest and ownership of the asset to the individual shareholders, so neither the REMIC nor the trustee may foreclose. The servicer is not a real party of interest. The servicer can only collect the money and pass it to the REMIC. That's the extent of their job. So who can foreclose? The answer is nobody. Oftentimes you will hear the bank respond to inquiries as to the real party of interest by saying Fannie Mae is the investor. They are technically not lying. This is true, but as I illustrated earlier, an investor becomes a majority shareholder of the traded stock, but they are not the holder in due course or the real party of interest. This is the lie that the banks are bringing before the court every single day. Only the true beneficial holder in due course is the real party of interest, not the investor. Again, if the bank is not the real party of interest, nor the holder in due course, what business do they have foreclosing on your house? And that's what I'm trying to tell you. If they don't have the original wedding promissory note, tell them to fucking kick rocks. You guys know what it is. It's a game of chess. Stop playing checkers with these clowns. That's what I got for you for now. Until we meet again.